Well, a squadron in a Navy unit, whether it's a ship, flying squadron, submarine, whatever it is, you can have a lot of junior officers around. So if a suspected crime has happened, the first thing that gets done in the Navy is you get a junior officer assigned to the case. And you basically become half cop, half DA there, because you are the person doing the full investigation, but you're there conducting all the core interviews as if I was a line cop, beat cop out there doing things. And then part DA is trying to figure out, let me put all the case together, because my report then went to a junior officer's report in the Navy, then goes to the executive officer. And the executive officer and the commanding officer of the unit then decides, okay, how they become the judges. The executive officer and the commanding officer basically become judges. Unless, of course, it goes to a general court martial, and then generals and admirals get involved. So that 9 times out of 10, it's what's called captain's mass, where the head of a Navy unit basically adjudicates and becomes the judge and the jury oftentimes there. But it just happened one morning. I got called in to our legal office, and basically, James, we have an accusation. A sailor got beat up over the weekend, and he alleges that four other sailors beat him up and left him for dead at the side of the road there. So we need you to investigate, put together the report for this. So it was interesting because, to be honest, when I first got presented that how could 4 sailors beat up a fellow sailor and leave him for dead on the side of the road, that's TV type things. That doesn't happen in the real world, that type of thing. So, well, as it eventually proved, it did happen, but it was going through interviewing various folks. They tried to be coy after it was basically sailors.
Welcome back to another episode of Cold Red. I'm Ray Carr, and with me always is Fitz. Fitz, how are you?
I'm great. Happy 100, Ray.
Absolutely. Fitz, today we're celebrating Veterans Day. And in honor, we have a very special guest, James Dillon. James served 24 years of active duty in the Marine Corps and Navy in various roles, ranging from infantry rifleman, counterterrorism, to naval flight officer, to budget analyst and speechwriter. Across 10 years, stationed in the Pentagon, he witnessed key decision-making as a special assistant to the Secretary of the Navy, 2 Secretaries of Defense, and Vice Chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff. James, welcome to Cold Red. It's an honor to have you on, and thank you for your service.
Thank you to you both.
And for anyone who may be wondering what I meant by Happy 100, this is the 100th episode of Cold Red. And we're happy on this Veterans Day, 11/11, which was actually marks the end of World War I at 11:11 a.m., 1918, I believe. That's why this is celebrated today. Memorial Day, for everyone out there, you know this, of course, but that's for the military members we've lost over the centuries. Veterans Day is more for those still with us, and that's who we have with us tonight. So, James, you and I go back a few years, not that long, but when we kicked around this idea of our Veterans Day show, Ray and I kicked a few names around and said, I know a guy who's really interesting. And he couldn't make it, but James, you were available, so I'm kidding. I'm kidding.
He always does that, James.
No,
don't let him get away with that.
Okay,
I know.
I said, no pressure to be interesting.
We do like to go back in time a bit with our guests, police officers, agents, art experts, whatever they are. Some bad guys we brought on, and we want to know how they got to be bad guys and eventually straightened out, where they probably wouldn't have come on Cold Red. But certainly law enforcement, certainly military people. James, walk us through maybe your early life. I know you grew up in the Midwest. Tell us about what actually influenced you to join the military.
Well, it's probably embarrassing at my age to say, but it was Tom Cruise, specifically Top Gun. Top Gun came out when I was in high school, right at that age, 16, 17 years old, when you're looking at what to do. And so I think I wound up watching that movie, I think 21 times back in high school, just fell in love with flying. So I knew I wanted to fly. I've done some research behind that, and F-14s that he flew, they're nice, they're fancy. They're great aircraft, F-18s and the jets. But upon studying, I really wanted to fly helicopters. I do search and rescue off of carriers. At the time, I didn't. Obviously, as I was young, I was learning. I was one of those students that was smart enough to get decent enough grades without having to ever study. I think I took a book home first day my senior year thinking this is the year I'm going to make it happen. And that lasted one day my senior year.
Taking the book home, you mean?
Well, yeah. And I actually did my homework at home for that one night. But that was about it. I think I was more interested doing Boy Scouts, playing basketball, things along those lines. Didn't have a lot of real coaching, real guidance outside of probably Boy Scouts and things like that about what I want to do with my life. So I was kind of piecing things together myself, and all I really knew is when I wanted to fly. If I wanted to fly, well, then I needed to go to the Naval Academy for some reason. And so that kind of led me, started going down the path to applying to Annapolis.
And you went to the Naval Academy.
It was a little bit of a circuitous route because, again, no matter, how much my brain could help me without studying, I still didn't study, so I didn't have the greatest of GPAs coming out of high school. So didn't get in when I applied out of high school. I was offered to go to the prep school just from, I think, the leadership, leading a basketball team, leading in Boy Scouts, I think from the leadership side. My grades were, I think, close enough to have sent me to the Naval Academy prep school up in Rhode Island. But when the blue and gold officer, who's either active duty or retired officer, usually gets assigned to people who are getting close in the application process for the Naval Academy, called me one evening and talked about going to what we call NAPS, Naval Academy Prep School. I had no idea really what he was talking about. And at that point, I'd already enlisted in the Marine Corps as a backup just in case I didn't get into the academy directly. And so not recognizing that going through the prep school was a direct method to get into the Naval Academy, I wound up declining and wound up following my enlistment and going into the Marine Corps, and then eventually getting into the Naval Academy.
It's funny you mentioned that. Two of my classmates in high school went to the prep school up in Rhode Island in order to get into Annapolis. And they both went through 4 years in Annapolis. Now, they went in 75 and graduated in 70. Well, they went into the prep school in 75, so they didn't start the academy until fall 76, so they graduated in 1980. Matter of fact, I'm going to be with both of them at my high school reunion on Friday. So I'm going to have to tell them I spoke with you, James, as an alum. Now, I don't know I know yours is a little bit more recent than back in the 70s and early 80s. But those guys, I think one became a commander on a ship, and the other, Mac, he did some things, but he went to Pensacola. He was looking into flying as well, something with his eyesight, and he went in the Marines, though. He went the Marine way. And it's kind of funny. A lot of people always wonder, you say you're a Marine, but you're also in the Navy. Maybe you could explain to our audience how that actually works. You're at the Naval Academy, but yet when you come out of Naval Academy, you can sign up and sign on to be a Marine at that point. Is that correct?
Yes. And until basically January of my what we call first year, basically senior year at the Academy, up until that January, I was prepared, maybe even by February, I was prepared to go back in the Marine Corps from there because I was 3 years infantry. Your standard 0311. I was part of a somewhat specialized unit. I think they're called fast companies now. Everything, the names changes. They used to be called Marine Barracks, then they were fast companies, and I'm sure they've changed the name since in the past 20 years, 30 years since I was there.
FBI does that too. It's okay.
Yeah, absolutely.
But there's a phrase, once a Marine, always a Marine. So you're never a former Marine. You're always a prior Marine at worst.
Right. That's true.
You never say ex-Marine. I know that. I thought former Marine was okay, but prior Marine is preferred?
Yeah, you're never former.
Okay.
You're always a Marine. And that was,
okay.
And it was my innocence, my ignorance in high school, not knowing what the paths were and thinking going through the enlisted ranks at the Marine Corps was my one shot at having a shot to eventually get to the Naval Academy. But it changed my life because I was a decent enough kid, but didn't really have that discipline and stick-to-itiveness that I think the words I was used most recently at my Naval Academy graduation was intensity, I think was the word my old classmates would say. And things like that I gained. 4 drill instructors. If I saw them today, I'd still kick them in the shin. But then I'd probably kick them in the shin twice, then shake their hands because they changed who I was, and had the experience of being enlisted before then being asked to lead enlisted was life changing, career changing. Just being able to appreciate. Okay, I'm here to serve others and not to be served, which was the way. And then with the Marine Corps, just always, hey, what's my mission? Tell me which hill I'm going to take, and by God, I'm going to take that hill. Doesn't really matter what.
Let me ask you, I've been in your company, and I know you're a big guy. What are you, about 6'5"?
6'4", 6'5".
Well, that works on a basketball court, but couldn't that be a detriment to flying? Certainly some fighter jets. Back in the day, I was told you could be too tall, and you wouldn't be in pilot school.
Yeah, there's still a flight doctor that probably is still laughing at this point, because at the Naval Academy, when we're junior year, you go through and you get basically full physical screening to see what you qualify for. I made myself small enough to pass the dimensions at the Naval Academy. I thought small to pass those measurements, but I was within the waiverable area that when I got down to Pensacola, about halfway through primary training, I met with the flight doc, or flight doc had me come over and put me in a jet. It was called a T2, a trainer at the time, a jet trainer. And the idea is you have to be able to sit in the cockpit or in the flight station with your legs flat against the seat, but still have your head be able to clear the ejection handle that's above you. And so for me to get the seat low enough for the ejection handle to clear my head, I was obviously scrunched in. And as soon as the flight doc climbed up, all he did was climb up, looked at me for 1 second, started laughing, and climbed down and said, "We're done." Because there's no way I was ever going to fit in a jet. But the Navy I went up flying in an EP-3, which is probably the Navy's largest aircraft. Well, at least at the time, it's probably our largest land aircraft between C-130s and P-3s. So it was big enough for me.
So was that a devastating moment for you when, son, you're too tall to fly these types of aircraft? I mean, how did you handle that?
The devastation, if there was any by that point, had already come and passed with my eyesight. Because at the time I wore glasses, and so I couldn't fly helicopters. I thought, because I'd seen folks flying helicopters, but they had already passed their initial training. They were already flying, and their eyes went bad over time. By the time I met them when I was young. And so I thought, well, I can't fly jets, but I at least fly helicopters, and that's what I'd love to fly. I do have one of my happiest hours in my life was behind a SH-60. I got 1 hour flight time in there. So that reassured me that, yes, helicopters would have been the most fun thing to fly, because they are. But barring that, I just always knew, it's like, okay, I'm going to be land-based. And to be honest, it's not too bad never being too far from a golf course.
I know Ray can relate to that, certainly.
Yeah, absolutely.
Tell us back up a little bit, the rigmarole of the U.S. Naval Academy. I mean, showing up, I know you went to the prep school, but at some point you show up the first day, you're a midshipman, correct?
Yeah.
And is there hazing? I mean, do you have to shine shoes for the seniors? I mean, some of this may be top secret, I know, but whatever you're willing to share, how does it, then do you turn it around a few years later when the new midshipman?
Yeah, well, it starts at the prep school. And to be honest, in between doing a whole lot of push-ups at the prep school, because the summer before that academic year, the midshipmen come up and have a training cadre to get everybody in. And the prep school is built around a cadre of former or prior enlisted, like myself, or at the time active duty enlisted. They're there also to help the classmates who are fresh in from school, or they'd done a year of college somewhere, fresh in from high school. So we became the core of that cadre. In between doing push-ups, I still remember, I could point to the place in the hallway where we stand up, they'd line us all up in the line and said, and it's probably a cheesy thing, it probably gets said on television, look to your left, look to your right. One of those people is not going to make it with you. It's like, well, that was true. The person, whichever it was at the time, the one person on my left didn't make it through the prep school. The other one didn't make it through the academy. So we had 300 start, only about 100 of us made it through the full academy. But then we became kind of the core cadre of the plebe class to enter the Naval Academy through plebe summer. And so to provide a little bit of leadership and more experience for our roommates, for our classmates, to kind of help them adjust to a whole lot of push-ups. There's what's called chopping as a plebe. Well, again, I'll say for the record, my year was the last real plebe year at the Naval Academy because we didn't have air conditioning.
Ah.
So I think we can genuinely have a claim to having the last real plebe year. But there's plenty of push-ups. There's things called chow calls where you're out in the hallway, screaming the menu for the upcoming meal, plus standard language that we're supposed to learn and recite, things along those lines. There's activities called chopping. You stick to the middle of the hallway, and anytime you need to make a turn, you can't just, take that slow corner into a room or around a hallway. You go through the middle of one hallway, left turn, right turns, yell, "Go Navy, sir," "Beat Army, sir," and then chop and basically running. You're it's called chopping to high knees, running along the whole time. I got pretty fit because we were also chopping up and down stairs, and I was always, in my 4 years, I either lived on the 4th deck or the 5th deck of our barracks. So I stayed in pretty good shape that way, I think. But there's lots of things that seem like hazing and maybe from a civilian perspective could be construed as hazing, but it actually, how many years would it take? Took a year and a half, 2 years later, when I'm flying missions into Iraq and at the Naval Academy, having to memorize all the things daily, having to memorize a menu. For example, the menu for noon meal is this, the menu for evening meal is this. By the end of plebe year, you get good at looking at a menu. You can look at it for 2 seconds and memorize the full list of whatever the menu is there. Well, the same thing applied when going to Iraq. You fly in, you have a list of code words for towns or code words for different events, and you have a few minutes to look at that list and you have to memorize it. So it can sort of be construed as hazing, but there still always is a purpose behind everything. I'll admit that now. I didn't quite see the purpose, didn't quite appreciate the purpose going through it. It's a little bit aggravating. I've gone through, by the time I got to the Naval Academy, that was the third time I had my head shaved against my will. So having gone through Marine boot camp, through the Naval Prep School, and then again through plebe year, I was kind of over it, but I do appreciate how hard it was to get through.
It's interesting. It sounds like everything that you just said was a means of preparation for you for the future and for what you were going to be tasked to do in the future. So there was no waste in anything that they made you do. Everything was part of a preparation piece.
Yeah, exactly. Because I was the 150th class to graduate. So after 150 years, they got pretty good at knowing, how to train somebody and how to be an officer in the military.
Yeah, absolutely. So you did some flight tours. How much time did you spend? Was that the only out of country you spent was Iraq, or were there other spots as well?
Flying wise, it's hard to pin down. Of course, throughout the Middle East, been through. We used to joke with my aircraft, we can go anywhere and break within 24 hours.
Yeah.
Because
Sure.
it's a rather old aircraft by the time I was flying. But going through Spain, Hawaii, up and down the Western, all throughout the Western Pacific, flying around. And then when I get through my career in the Pentagon, worked for who I did work for, got to visit. I'd have to sit down and think about how many countries I've been to.
Wow, that's pretty amazing. So, it's one of the things that I always had on my bucket list to hit every state in the Union. And I've done that, and I would like to hit a few more countries that I've not hit. Although I spent some time overseas because my father was in the service, but there's some countries I like to hit that I haven't been to. And I know Jim has done a lot of overseas travel as well. But I always think that really well rounds you in being able to deal, because you get a taste of all these different cultures, which is actually what happens right here in the United States. It's a melting pot, just pretty interesting.
And it makes you appreciate what we have.
Oh yeah.
When you're other places, there are great things about other places as well. Even at the height, because when I was in the Middle East, flying there, it was around 2000. I still remember not everybody, quite a few people across the United States got to celebrate Y2K, the new millennium, really extra fireworks, extra celebrations. I was on lockdown in a barracks in Bahrain because we didn't know if somebody was going to try to drive a truck bomb through the barricades into us. So there's downfalls about being overseas. But even in Bahrain and things along those lines, you can find an Irish expat or a British expat bar and find good folks just about everywhere around the world.
And you always had to make sure you didn't drink too much, because you had to leave that bar at some point and get back to the base, and you want to be a little careful about that. That's amazing. So you obviously graduated Annapolis, and I know you talk a little bit about your time in Iraq. 2000, that was after the first Iraq war, a few years before the next one, but we certainly had missions we were conducting over there, and that was part of what you were doing, no doubt.
Yeah, it was mostly what we used to, it's still probably technically called Operation Southern Watch, back when there's Operation Northern Watch and there's Operation Southern Watch. My squadron would usually fly out of the southern part of Iraq, Kuwait, Saudi Arabia, those areas, there to help monitor, to keep the no-fly zone intact. Under the NATO rules and UN rules in place at the time, around the it's depressing to say, I guess, around the turn of the century. I guess we can say it that way.
It meant something else when we were growing up. It was a long time ago, but now it's only 25 years ago. Hard to believe.
But it was rewarding. It was rewarding flying there because my aircraft is the biggest, slowest, ugliest thing in the Navy. The EP-3 is, and so we would be up there just to do monitoring and to help guard, well, at least what I call the pointy nose guys, the ones going in with the fighters for whatever mission they may be doing, just either Overwatch or if they had a particular bombing mission to do that day. We were always the overwatch to help support them. So it was good to be able to be there to have everybody's back.
James, could you explain what the EB-3 is for our listeners? A lot may not understand what that is, what type of plane that is.
Well, I think I'm supposed to say my pre-canned. We conducted maritime surveillance operations in accordance with all international law. I think that was the phrase.
Okay.
That in the menu he has memorized from dinner
I
back
can
in
neither confirm nor deny
midnight.
that was the phrase. We were basically doing surveillance operations and conducting maritime security.
And what type of plane was it that you were in?
It was a derivative of what's called the P3, the standard P3 Orion. P3 Orion is a large, 24 crew aircraft. Ours was 24. Well, the P3s had smaller crews. They usually had a dozen. We had 24 on my aircraft. But we would have around various equipment, various missions that I'm not really allowed to talk about. My wife didn't even know. If you recall, before 9/11 happened, the other big event that happened earlier that year, ironically on April Fool's Day, was my aircraft going down in China, or getting hit by a Chinese aircraft and going down. So I think even before then, CNN then started reporting everything that my aircraft did, where it was, what we do. I'm not too sure my wife even knew what I did at that point.
But it was a 4-engine turboprop, is that correct?
Yes.
Are you allowed to answer this question? Are there any armaments on there to protect yourself?
I probably can't get into what we had and what we didn't have.
That's fine.
Okay.
On the aircraft, sorry.
Mostly
no worries.
surveillance and reconnaissance.
We conducted maritime surveillance operations in accordance with all international law.
And shit on a shingle for dinner on Tuesday night.
Well, again, it was land-based aircraft because obviously too big to be on an aircraft carrier. So we were never too far from either our queue rooms or a golf course.
So walk us through, you obviously you graduate, you're spending time flying these aircraft in Iraq, the Pacific, Middle East. What's sort of the next stop in your military career? Did you raise your hand for something, or were you told to go somewhere?
A little bit of both, because I had a somewhat unique, there's been a lot of uniqueness to the naval career that I had, per se, because coming out of the Naval Academy, they let 25 of the top geeks, I guess the most geeky ones, go to independent study, independent universities. So straight out of the Naval Academy, I went to University of Chicago and got my MBA there. And so part of going to there meant that I had what we call a payback tour to come back, to go somewhere and do budgeting. And I wanted to come back to DC. I'd been in the Pentagon for a couple summers up to that point, but I wanted to go back and do budgeting. So it was something I wanted to do, but I was also required to, as a condition for getting to go off and get my MBA. At the time, Chicago was ranked number 5 in the world. I think they're ranked number 1 now. So sorry, Chicago, I probably held them back. weighed them down when I went through.
Helped advance them. Come on. Look at it that way.
But, well, they probably saw some corrections. They know, if we let that guy in, we need to make some corrections
All right.
to things moving forward. But it was, again, game-changing, because all the techniques and things I was able to use to then come back to D.C. and do budgeting. So I went to work for it's called FMB4, which is a budgeting office. I was helping to run the Navy and Marine Corps' flying hours program, basically doing all the budgeting and funding for all the Navy and Marine Corps aircraft and squadrons.
Wow. It's impressive.
Important stuff. Someone has to do that to keep
impressive.
everyone in the air when they should be in the air and bring them down safely. That was part of your job.
It's not bad. I was probably, what would I have been, 29, 30 years old, and I'm helping to run a $5 billion annual budget for the entire Navy and Marine Corps. So that's one of the things I learned to love and appreciate over time. Is the military gave me, certainly, and gives others, opportunities to do things that folks just won't have a chance to either at a certain age or ever. So I gained an early appreciation for, I'm here doing this, and going into what then became Operation Iraqi Freedom years ago. When it first came up that, hey, we may go into Iraq, nobody believed it. Nobody thought we'd go into Iraq. So I was still a junior officer, still just a lieutenant, Navy Lieutenant 03 at the time. So they said, Lieutenant Dillon, we don't think this is going to happen. Here's parameters, build the aviation budget for going to war in Iraq. And so I mistakenly, because nobody thought it was going to actually come to fruition, I got to put that budget together and have to be able to do that as well while I was there. But I did that for a year.
So in effect, you were the money man behind the 2003 invasion at least for the Navy.
One of many money people, but yeah, I was the nerd that can come up with the really good spreadsheets to make it the best interactive databases I could to get the best accurate estimate of what it would cost.
So you were assigned to the Pentagon maybe just a year or so after 9/11, when, of course, one of the airliners hit there.
So obviously September 11th, 2001, I arrived at the Pentagon March 2002.
Still under construction, that part of that side of the building. I know I drove by it a lot back then.
Still under construction, being able to understand from the aviation perspective what actually happened there, to be able to see where the end, they could point to an alleyway. This is where the furthest of the engines went. Shortly after that wedge, we call them wedges, of the Pentagon was put back together. I happened to be in an office there was a office called the Coalition Provisional Authority. I don't know if that rings any bells with you or anybody, but that was Bremer and everybody was in Iraq. The U.S. government had a section in Iraq, basically running the country of Iraq during the war and immediately after the war. So I got assigned to a team to basically help transition the government of Iraq back to the Iraqis, and also to get the U.S. government out, whatever the Department of Defense is doing, who's supposed to do this function. Is it State Department? Is it Commerce Department? Is it Defense Department? Try to figure out all those moving parts. But as part of that office, they moved us back into that original wedge that had been hit right at the point of impact. So that was a little surreal.
I was there 2 weeks afterwards, looking for evidence and picking up. We're looking for body parts too. We didn't find any. Luckily, at that point, we knew enough to make us, at least at the Pentagon, put us into the alien spacesuits and the hazmat suits. But there are some people that were with me that are still getting diagnosed with cancer back from those days. But yeah, so I can relate. My only time ever in the Pentagon was 2 weeks after it was hit that day on 9/11. So anyway, we're a true crime podcast, and I'm interested because we talked about this before, James. At some point in your career, you were involved in some sort of investigations, and you had an interesting way you explained you were sort of half cop, half DA. Can you walk our audience through how that part of your career kicked in for a while? And I know one investigation, we don't need names or anything, but some kind of an assault took place. Just how did that work into your career?
Sure. And well, a squadron in a Navy unit, whether it's a ship, flying squadron, submarine, whatever it is, you can have a lot of junior officers around. So if a suspected crime has happened, the first thing that gets done in the Navy is you get a junior officer assigned to the case, and you basically become half cop, half DA there, because you are the person doing the full investigation, but you're there. I'm conducting all the core interviews as if I was a line cop, a beat cop out there doing things. And then part DA is trying to figure out, let me put all the case together, because my report then went to a junior officer's report in the Navy, then goes to the executive officer. And the executive officer and the commanding officer of a unit then decides, okay, how they become the judges. The executive officer and the commanding officer basically become judges. Unless, of course, it goes to a general court martial, and then generals and admirals get involved. Things like that. 9 times out of 10, it's what's called captain's mass, where the head of a Navy unit basically adjudicates and becomes the judge and the jury oftentimes there. But it just happened one morning. I got called in to our legal office. And basically, James, we have an accusation. A sailor got beat up over the weekend, and he alleges that four other sailors beat him up and left him for dead at the side of the road there. So we need you to investigate, put together the report for this. So it was interesting because, to be honest, when I first got presented that how could 4 sailors beat up a fellow sailor and leave him for dead on the side of the road, that's TV type things. That doesn't happen in the real world type things. Well, as it eventually proved, it did happen, but it was going through interviewing various folks. They tried to be coy it was basically sailors at a party. Sailors doing what sailors do at a party, a little bit, probably too much alcohol gets involved, and feelings get hurt. And one sailor decides to leave. I think after some feelings got hurt, and another 4 decided to continue the altercation, shall we say, knowing where he needed to walk to get back to the base there. So they pulled up alongside and beat him up pretty soundly, and then kept going on. They thought they were going to be coy by going into the nearby town and all go into a grocery store and buying a bottle of water. And then so they'd have the receipt that I could not have been, beating up this person on the side of the road. We were all getting a bottle of water at the time at the grocery store. And they literally all brought in their receipts for a $1 bottle of water.
Criminal masterminds, huh?
Yes. Things like that. Even halfway through it, I still couldn't believe it, but I was still trying. I was pacing out, driving out, how far could this person have gone at this time, putting together the timelines, things along those lines. And then one thing just kept eating me in the back of my mind is like this one sailor, having already previously left the party, I couldn't get it out of my mind. He left the party, so how could he identify the 4 that later happened to have left the same party there? So at that point, I started turning my attention around to, okay, perhaps these young gents are perhaps guilty of this. And so the evidence was starting to weigh in at that point, talking with various folks, what happened at the party, things along those lines. And I put it together, and then putting together, still piecing this together in late 90s technology on a computer. Wasn't as easy as it is. I wasn't able to chat GPT my report too easily, but I put it together, and I guess when I'd probably describe my Marine Corps way, very detailed bullets, sub-bullets, about 40 pages of things, presenting all evidence, things like that, turn it over to the XO. And at that point, as the investigating officer, I was to be hands off, and I was deploying anyway. So I basically handed over to the XO, and last I knew, they were 3 of them from my squadron. There was a 4th from another squadron. One of the sailors was from another squadron down the runway. So last I knew, they were all headed to a court-martial for not only the initial assault, but then falsifying records, lying to officers, and various sundry extra charges that could get added onto it.
So Tom Cruise in the movie Top Gun influenced you early on to join the Navy. Did you, and then certainly the military, did you later look up to him for his role in A Few Good Men, looking at the prosecution of the Marine captain in Guantanamo? And I mean, there's some similarities here.
There is.
You and Tom Cruise, I can see this going, and a kinship here.
Well, have to be honest, while I think we never had the term Code Red
right
in the Marine Corps. I'm
Not
sure
to be confused with Cold Red.
Well, there's that.
But go ahead.
I'm sure that's a Hollywood invention, or Code Red, or things like that. But there were things done in my Marine Corps unit to help those who were slightly wayward Marines become better Marines, things like that. So I knew that happened. So got to be honest, I probably identified at that point a little bit more with Jack Nicholson than with Tom Cruise.
And that someone couldn't handle the truth. That is a great movie if anyone hasn't seen that.
It is a great movie, I agree.
And every character is portrayed so well. All right, so that's kind of your venture into law enforcement, criminal investigation, at least for one. How'd this whole thing last? A few days, a few weeks, month or two? I'm just curious.
That one, I think I had 3 days. I think they gave me 72 hours to get my report back in.
Wow.
For that. Because I think there's probably extra pressure, because I think a week after that I was deploying. We were constantly deploying with my aircraft, so there was the time pressure of being able to get in, get it done, and move on. I had another investigation. Chief Petty Officer had been accused of arriving to work drunk, or at least under the influence of alcohol still, which is a no-no in aviation, especially when you're trying to fix the aircraft that I'd be flying on. So I was supposed to go on a mission one day, got called off at the mission, said, Lieutenant Dillon, you have this investigation, and this investigation needs to be over and a report written by the time the aircraft landed. Because my aircraft would go on 10 and a half, 12-hour missions. So I basically had 12 hours to do a full investigation, as where this Chief Petty Officer had indeed arrived under the influence there. Fortunately for him, and he's a good petty officer, a good chief. There. So fortunately, as I told him initially, if I told him when I first met with him, presented, these are the charges, this is what you're accused of. And I told him, it's like, if you're guilty, I'm going to be able to prove it beyond a shadow of a doubt. If you're innocent, I equally want to prove it beyond a shadow of a doubt, so you don't have this hanging over you. And it turned out to be, I think there was, again, hurt feelings. There was a petty officer that didn't quite like the chief. And so some things came aligned there, I think, where the accusation was let fly from there. But being able to piece together all the evidence and what happened, I was able to, again, prove beyond a shadow of a doubt that he was innocent of what he's being accused from.
And that was all in a 12-hour investigation?
Mm-hmm.
Ray, can you imagine in the FBI if they gave us 12 hours to do an investigation?
Well, the difference with James and us is that everybody's in one spot. You don't have to run all over the city to find these people. They're where you need them to be, and you can call them to be at a certain spot. At least I hope that's the case. They didn't have you running all over the place. Everybody was centrally located for you, right, James?
The sailor assault, it was at least around what was a place called Whidbey Island in Washington. And the other one was obviously limited to a base in Misawa, Japan for the chief. So yeah, geographically limited.
That helps.
Didn't have as many concerns of people doing the quote unquote lawyering up there. So if I'm able to talk to various people, we're officers, we're enlisted, we're all
Right.
sailors in one way, shape, or form. So we're free to talk to each other.
I get what you talk about with the chief petty officer coming into work drunk as he's working on the aircraft. I had the chance to work a case where DOD came into my office and said they were having a drug problem at Boeing in the shops and in the management level. And I said, how do you know? And they said, well, there was a Chinook that went down in Afghanistan and they detected a FOD in the fuel line. And a FOD is a foreign object, was detecting a fuel line, and they traced it all the way back to the Ridley plant. And so we went in, and there was a huge drug problem in there. They're working on these helicopters, and these guys are using Oxycontin, heroin, Percocet, and they're high as kites. There's a lot of checks and balances that they have in place, but still, it's not fall safe. But that was something that we did, and that happened in the late 2000s, probably around. I think the one that went down was probably 2008, 2009. Went down over in Afghanistan, so there were some concerns.
I was, again, probably sounds cheesy, but I was extremely fortunate to work with a lot of great folks. And that's just the nature of the beast, folks in uniform. And we had a tough enough time keeping our aircraft together. I still will never forget, I could point to the place on the tarmac, Matt, I'm about to take, we had to move aircraft around the world. And so I was going to go on a round the world trip, ferrying different aircraft around the world. My first leg being from Whidbey Island, Washington State to Hawaii, across this not so small body of water called the Pacific Ocean. And I'm looking outside and I see a handful of folks gathered around one of the propellers, and they continued to look around one of the propellers. So I got curious, stepped outside, what's up, fellas? What's going on? And they, without missing a beat, nothing, sir. There's just a crack in the propeller. We just have to sand it. We have to sand the propeller down to get the crack small enough where we can duct tape it and then send you out. And I was like, okay.
Duct tape on a propeller.
A propeller that's going to be rotating at thousands of RPM across a large body of water for hours on end. But as long as they made that crack, if they've sanded it down to the crack small enough. So everybody knew there was a good mission, a mission we had to get done. Generally speaking, everybody was pretty locked in.
I have to ask you, in the 24 years in the Marine Corps, must have been hundreds of challenging operational roles that you engaged in. What was the most challenging role that you engaged in?
To be honest, I think the hardest position, probably most rewarding for what I was able to accomplish. But when I came back to DC, ostensibly to work off my MBA, is what we called it, I got another master's at GW in political management. I needed hours, in 400 hours of internship type of work. So I went to work, initially an intern for the Secretary of Navy, then got picked up as his speechwriter, and then moved over to be the Secretary, well, technically for two Secretaries of Defense, their speechwriter. But to be a naval officer helping a political staff become a team, become a staff, and there was one challenge. When I showed up, they wouldn't even share light. Each had their own lamps on their desk. And so the day I turned on the overhead light, it's like, let's at least share light. Let's share ideas. Because it's things to help build that team, but also to help with the messaging in the middle of the time when the Iraq War was basically turning south in public opinion. And knowing what actual truth is versus what the press would say. Nothing against the press, nothing too much against the press generally, but there's folks that have agendas, like every profession. Every profession has people with agendas. And so there was plenty of folks with those during the Iraq War. So to be I worked for Secretary Rumsfeld and then for Secretary Gates, to be working the messages, and they're working as basically a deputy assistant secretary alongside the other NASDs to try to help put the messaging together as far as, hey, this is what we're trying to accomplish, this is what's happening in the face of articles and things that weren't exactly true coming out. That was probably some of the most challenging.
What about your takeaways from that?
It's people have agendas. It really is. Ironically now, because I'm now a school teacher, and I'm teaching ninth graders about yellow journalism, about the sinking of the USS Maine, the sinking of the the SS Lusitania. Mm-hmm. How did yellow journalism impact how the nation went to or did not go to war at the time? And my shtick with the kids is I tell them the adage, if you don't know history, you don't appreciate history, you're doomed to repeat it. And every class I say, this is how we're repeating what happened 100 years ago, 150 years ago. This is how we're doing the exact same thing today. And we were doing it back in 2003. We're doing it today. It doesn't matter if anybody's liberal, conservative, left, right. It doesn't really matter to me.
You got a little ahead of us here, but yeah, I think I'm aware of you teaching high school, and I think those students are very fortunate to have you as their instructor. You're definitely a different teacher there than most of the other ones they have, I'm sure, and with your background. And I certainly hope they appreciate that. I think we've had a few talks, not always easy with some of the students from what you said, but I think when you have the whole semester, between this semester and next semester, I think those students will definitely appreciate what they have in you as their teacher. I certainly hope so.
Yeah, because I tell them the biggest thing, whether or not anybody remembers the Chinese Exclusion Act of 1892, I tell them, I'm honest with them, it doesn't really matter to me. I would forget about the Chinese Exclusion Act of 1892 or those type of things. But if I'm teaching them how to think, how to appreciate what's happening in history now, how might we have done it then? Is there a better way to do it now? And help them piece together the whys and not just the what have happened. To help them, I just had a talk with the classes this last week of what's AI going to do to you? What careers are actually going to be open to you by the time you graduate from high school or trade school, college? If you're able to think, if you're able to reason, that will set you ahead and be prepared for whatever's coming down the pike for us. So challenging to say the least, but rewarding to see them hopefully growing.
Thinking about some of these high-stake decisions that you were part of or saw while you were working in some of the various positions in the Pentagon, is there anything that surprised you? And you don't have to get into detail about anything, but is there anything that really surprised you about some of these decisions?
How much turf mattered. Because by the point I got to the more senior positions in the Pentagon, I'd been enlisted and a junior officer and a mid-grade officer for years. And so it was always about the team. What can I do to support the team? How do we accomplish a mission? Okay, you want us to take that hill? We together are going to figure out how to take that hill. Doesn't matter what you're going to put between me and that hill. We're going to take it. But realizing just how much turf was involved. Again, Secretary Rumsfeld, I think it was a team of 5 of us to start. We got called in to basically pull the U.S. government out of Iraq and to return some normalcy back to relations and heaven forbid to help the Iraqis actually run their own country again. But it was amazing some of the Americans who were in Iraq basically treated it as their own turf. Oh, this is our country. And that was the first real introduction that was anathema to my thinking of how much turf. And then I'd started recognizing it again. I worked for one of my tours, I worked for an undersecretary for personnel and readiness. He had 9 undersecretaries, deputy undersecretaries working for him. Each had their own turf that they did not want to be messed with. Treasury Department, when I was over Treasury Department's a department of name only, essentially, made up of about 10 different bureaus. Each of the bureaus doesn't want to work with the other bureaus. Most oftentimes they don't need to work with the other bureaus, but I was in a position where I was trying to bring them all together for common. So just seeing again and again and again how much turf mattered to people more than accomplishing what our mission was supposed to be. So a little sad, but then of course the joy of overcoming that by bringing people together or running over the people who didn't want to go along with this.
You had the opportunity to be around a lot of, the world's greatest leaders in some really, really important times in history of this country. If you had to choose one quality about leadership that meant the most, what quality would that be?
Selflessness. That one's easy.
Yeah.
Because I saw it. And again, what the press, what the public knows versus what reality is, it was hard for me because I saw that with Secretary Rumsfeld, Donald Rumsfeld, when I worked for him. He was the face of the Iraq war. So everything was shot at him. He became the bad guy through all this stuff. But to actually work for him personally, just to see the selflessness. He's Secretary of Defense. He didn't have to hang out with somebody like me. I was one of his team. That's great. By necessity, we'd together, but we'd be coming from an overseas trip where he probably had about 4 hours of sleep in 4 days. But he was still making a point as we were flying back across the ocean from wherever we were coming that he would go walk around and say hi to everybody, talk with everybody on the aircraft, just to go around and let them know that they mattered to him and stuff like that. So that the selflessness and the dedication that I saw in him, it made the not so short hours I was working during those years worth it to be able to support him as best I could.
He sounds like the kind of guy, certainly from what I read and what I heard from you, that this turf element you were speaking of a few minutes ago was not the prime issue for him. It was his leadership had to do with working with his officers, his men and women, and trying to let them know they're part of a team. Turf plays second role to teamwork. And to me, that is the best leader out there you can possibly find.
Yeah, because he was before, during, and after the 9/11 period, he was involved with trying to help the Pentagon do things better and try to improve how we operated from the Pentagon side. So he was all about that mission, no matter what it took from him.
Do you think he would have approved of the name change in the last few months from the Department of Defense to Department of War? What do you think of that?
I personally like going back to the change because in James Dillon's personal view, the military has three missions. First thing is to take single small things and make them take a single big thing and make them lots of small things. Take a vertical bad guy, make him a horizontal bad guy. And the third thing is probably to be so darn good at the first two that nobody ever challenges us. So becoming the Department of War really says better than anything as far as, hey, we're not about defense. We don't want to go to war, but if you want to challenge part 3 there, we'll do part 1 or part 2 if have to. That's the other thing that I'm really appreciating as a history teacher, how much we have to be dragged into a war as a country. And I appreciate that, to be sure, but to ensure that when that time comes, we are in it to win it. I appreciate that mindset, and I think Secretary Rumsfeld had that mindset as well, as best I can gauge.
And when the politicians stay out of these issues with our military, we tend to win the battles and the wars. It gets a little more complicated when the political element gets injected therein.
But there's pluses and minuses. It's great to have civilian leadership so that we don't go awry and truly take the Department of War to heart. Mm-hmm. So there's tensions can be frustrating. They can be extremely frustrating. I have decades of frustration that I could share, but it's healthy to have that pull, that tension there to help us with checks and balances.
There's some challenges that are facing the United States as it deals with national security. There's a lot of challenges, and the biggest problem with these challenges is that there's so many differing views and we're kind of divided. If I were to say, based on your experience, what do you think is the most misunderstood challenge that's facing the United States as far as national security?
Oh, that's easy. I just led a whole lecture on that one, or a whole teaching on that one on Friday. We are not recognizing that the nature of warfare has changed. Everybody, when they think warfare, they're thinking aircraft, ships, tanks, guns.
Ground forces.
Warfare is now water. It's rare earth minerals. It's a hacker taking out our electrical grid. It's the soft power that there's no country that's going to cross our oceans for one and take on our nuclear arsenal for others. That'd be ridiculous for anybody at this point. And I think no matter how crazy we think people are around the world, nobody's genuinely that crazy. However, the fight for resources, which is really behind just about every conflict since Thag first threw a rock at Krug back in a cave 20,000 years ago, it's generally been about resources in some way, shape, or form. So with water becoming scarce, with rare earth minerals by definition being rare, and how do we fight over those? How do we compete over those? It's not so much armies going to fight anymore. It's going to be what hacker is going to take out Newark's computer that's going to ground all the aircraft out there? What hacker is going to take out the grid in Atlanta or the grid in Denver? That's going to distract us while they then try to secure the mineral rights to such and such country while we're distracted over here type things. So the hardest part, at least in my thinkings, I spent a lot of thinking about it, is to try to recognize what's the future of warfare. Yes, it's great to have ships. It's great to have tanks and weapons and people ready to use them and able to use them in the right ways, but realizing what's really warfare going to be moving forward.
That's an excellent macro description or answer to Ray's question, but we've all learned a lot in the last 3 years in the Russian invasion of Ukraine with what these little toy drones that we used to have by our kids, or my kids actually bought one for me. They're fun to have, how they can be weaponized and what they can do on the battlefield. I know you were talking big picture, taking out power grids, whatever, all very important and critical. But boy, I'll tell you, these $100 drones with a hand grenade hooked to them, essentially, the damage they can do. And from people, they could be kids running these things that are really good at video games, and now they're sitting in a bunker somewhere in Ukraine or even outside of Ukraine, taking these drones in. And I'm sure there's people in your former shop at the Pentagon looking at, we got to be prepared for this, not only how we can launch drones against our enemies, but also how we can defend against them, because they can do some serious damage.
Oh, most certainly. I'm guessing the Secretary Hetzkath has entire teams dedicated to that, because that's what we're good at, because that's the nature of warfare too. The British Army in 1775 was really good at standing in the line, shooting in the line and fixing bayonets and taking the battlefield that way. So we, as a bunch of misfits across 13 colonies, figured out, well, we can't fight them that way that warfare is now. Let's figure out a new way to fight warfare. Let's hit and run. Let's crouch instead of standing in a line. Maybe when we're shooting, change the nature of warfare. And that's been every war since the inception of war. So it's always having that team of thinkers about, okay, on the battlefield, what's that next challenge? I see stories all the time of the Navy coming up with various UAV or UUV, I think they're called, undersea unmanned vehicles and autonomous ships and things like that. How are we changing our warfare to prepare for the next type of, if we have to go to a battlefield? Because unfortunately, if history has taught us anything, we're still going to have, even if we have electrical grids, fights over water, things like that, we're still going to have kinetic warfare still be part of our life for probably ever, unfortunately.
Seeing it in Eastern Europe right now, unfortunately. A few more questions, James. You sort of answered this to some degree, but I'll maybe see if you can specify it. Looking back at your 24 years of service, if you could point to one contribution you made you're most proud of, what would that be?
Quite honestly, if it was a single contribution, I think it was, I'll say it this way, kicking the Americans out of Iraq, getting the Coalition Provisional Authority out of Iraq. I still have, we published a nice big plan to make it happen, two-sided, about 500 pages. So it's pretty extensive, but to have a core of 5 people and to bring together all we did to be able to make that logistically happen in a short time period. I think we were about 6 or 9 months. We had to accomplish that. So if I had a single thing, being able to do that with and we were literally making it up as we were going. I had an assistant secretary from the VA was called over to the Pentagon to lead. He had been a general, a 3-star general before, but he's called back to lead. And I got called in one day, Commander Dillon, we need you to go out and find what's being done in Iraq, who's doing it, and who will need to do it. I had to go knocking on doors in a not so small building called the Pentagon, trying to piece together all the players involved in that. So yeah, to have that kind of challenge and, well, quite honestly, the really long hours involved that one. If there's a single thing I did, I was happy for that.
Yeah, starting a war and taking over a country can be done. Ending the war, leaving the country, much more difficult, we've learned over the last half century or so. Obviously, you were tasked with that mission in Iraq, and it sounded like it was a successful one. And of everything that you were proud of in your career, that seems to be at the top, so good for you. And all the service people that could have been there that never went there because of you getting that provisional government set up by the Iraqis themselves. So good for you. If I can ask maybe the last question, for those considering a career in the military today, what piece of advice or encouragement would you give them?
Look to serve. Because we can think big picture, we can think strategic, fly the national flag, serve in the uniform, things like that. But really when it comes down to, you're serving the person to your left and your right. It gets said every now and then, probably so much that it probably sounds cheesy. But ultimately, when I was carrying a rifle back in the Marine Corps days, or when I'm flying over Kuwait, Saudi Arabia, whatever, off of somebody's alleged, quote, coast, it was always about who's sitting to my left, who's standing to my right, that type of thing. So what can I do to serve you? So it's an adventure. It's not easy. But if it was easy, it wouldn't be an adventure, to be sure. But you get to work with some of the most amazing folks. I just had my 30th anniversary, or reunion, I guess, technically, at the Naval Academy. Saw some folks that I had not seen since we graduated. And I was probably Mr. Huggy all day, hugging people, because I was so happy to see folks I hadn't seen for so long and see what they were up to, because I missed. There's a phrase called the military family. It's not an in-your-face, weird type of family, but it just is. You look out for everybody like they're your family, and have those relationships. And getting into, yes, again, it's hard, but the people you get to work with day in, day out, and things you get to do day in, day out are just phenomenal. And there's no way I'd ever be able to repeat. I've probably had 12 lifetimes worth of lifetime memories just during my time in uniform, let alone after. there that I got to experience just by going there and just having that mindset of what can I do to serve people today.
John F. Kennedy, our president in 1960, is known for saying, it's not what your country can do for you, but for what you can do for your country. And I think that says a lot. I don't think we need a draft back in this country. I know Israelis have a mandatory service for all their people, I think once they hit 18, maybe even younger. I would like to see something in this country, and we can kind of end it with this, but that you give you some choices, sort of a domestic Peace Corps, maybe work with law enforcement, perhaps the military, but require young people to do something. And I just think we're seeing so many unhinged young people today and unconnected, and they just have no real leadership or direction. But to have some sort of a system set up where they would be rewarded. Maybe they get some equivalent of the VA loans or something like that, or VA benefits for this 2 to 4 years of service. And some can live, at home. Maybe some go other parts of the country. I just think we see something like that. Ray and we did law enforcement. Military is different, and we certainly respect you, James, for signing on the dotted line to begin with, as a 17-year-old maybe, or barely 8. You can look back. That 18-year-old kid made this decision for me. What the hell was he thinking? But in your case, it certainly worked out well. I mean, I have no regrets getting the law enforcement either after college. But again, the military and your career is there. And any young people listening, I would say consider this option. Give something back to your country. You'll appreciate it a lot more. Other people will appreciate you. And in the long run, you'll make yourself and your fellow citizens better at it.
I kind of agree with Jim said, and James with you. It's all about service. It really is, serving others. And I look at it from a law enforcement perspective, from a military perspective. Even you as a teacher, you're serving others. And my father was a career Army man. And he always said, look to serve. If you're going to do anything, do it in service of others. And I think everybody should do that. You should be required to do service of others. That's what this country was built on. And that's what you should do. And I think that's really, really important. And I tell you, this has been eye-opening for me, just to hear you and some of the things you said. I mean, you hit the nail on the head. And the biggest thing, I think, the biggest takeaway for me from this, James, is the fact that you talked about what's the next step in escalation here. It's not going to be troops on the ground. It's not going to be planes in the air. Well, it could be. It's going to be so much more than that, so much more devastating than that. Imagine how does a country survive without electricity, without water? Especially people in America. They're so spoiled, so more spoiled than other people in other countries. And that's what people in other countries, as you probably know, they always say, the Americans, they have everything, they're spoiled brats. I hear that all the time. You guys have everything. You have whatever you need. You have the medical stuff, you have all that stuff.
That's why they want to come here.
Exactly. But the thing is that you need to learn how to serve. I think that just makes you well-rounded. It makes you understand, and it makes you a better American. It makes you a better person. And that's my 2 cents, James.
Yeah. Well, I mean, you can serve big in uniform, but you can also serve small.
Absolutely.
I still remember as a kid, when you go to remember these things called malls that we still went to.
Right.
But around Christmas time, that was the time where 2 cars are going to the same spot in a very full mall, and it was Christmas time. So everybody thought, well, you can take the spot. I'll find another spot. You let somebody go through the door first. It's those little things that's day in, day out that people can do because, I'll let you have this spot. I'll find somewhere else. But next time somebody's going to let me have that spot. I'll serve you now because somebody's going to serve me. If we start that flow going, things are really tough in the country right now. Can't argue with that. Right now it's a 50-50 country and everybody's kind of butting heads. But pendulums generally swing through history. So if we're going to swing back to we're neighbors or we're shopping together, we're doing something together, that how can we help each other? Oh, can I get that thing off the top shelf because I'm 6'4" for you? And just the little things to help each other, and it can start from there and help us get to the point where maybe serving uniform is not that big of a stretch because I'm used to doing the small things.
What you just said there, I saw that after 9/11 in 2001. I saw people start taking care of each other, and all of a sudden people got away from that. But when we were really attacked, when you would think about it, how much America came together and how much people looked out for each other, and that doesn't seem to be happening anymore, and that's sad. You're right.
I think we have a whole other episode we could talk about this, right?
Yeah, I know.
Maybe invite James back for it.
Absolutely.
James, thank you so much. You're a friend, but you're also a great guest on Cold Red, and you only had a couple weeks' notice for this, but thank you so much. And again, we appreciate your service. Thank you for it on this Veterans Day. And all the veterans out there, living and deceased, any family members, this day is for you, and really the whole year is for you too, in terms of our thoughts and prayers to you and your family and the dedication you save in your serving. So everybody, thanks again for listening or watching this episode of Cold Red number 100. We plan on keep going too. And like and subscribe us everywhere you see us. Check us out on coldredpodcast.com. And again, thanks to the two Matts, our producers, Matt Robinson, Matt McLaughlin, Rick Schilling, our music producer. And everybody, we will see you back here next time on Cold Red.